Psychic Self-Defense, Chapter 16, Diagnosis of the Nature of an Attack. Having considered the purely physical factors in a psychic disturbance, we may now come to the consideration of its genuinely psychic factors. We must always bear in mind, however, that because physical dis-ease is found, it does not necessarily eliminate the psychic factor. A physical condition, such as an abnormal state of the blood, may cause a low form of psychism and put its victim in touch with evil astral conditions. Science may call it delirium or hallucination, but the occultists call it pathological psychism and can do a great deal to relieve it, either by closing down the psychic centers, chakras, or by excluding evil psychic influences from the environment of the patient so that the spirit he sees shall be angelic instead of demonic and cause him happiness instead of distress. The psychic centers forced open by a diseased bloodstream perceives anything that comes within their range of vision. Therefore, let us ensure that nothing except what is pleasant shall come near them. We may not be entirely able to keep him off the astral, but at least we can ensure that his wanderings shall be in a safe and pleasant part of the astral. People do not realize the extent to which the wanderings of delirium can be directed and controlled by suggestions whispered into the ear of a sick person. We can companion the sick man in his astral wanderings and make our voice heard among his visions by our knowledge, driving away the evil presences that threaten him and guiding his dreams into the way of peace. At the commencement of our diagnosis, we must distinguish between three broad classic cases of we must distinguish between three broad classes of psychic disturbance: those which are a byproduct of physical disease, those which are due to malicious human action, and those which are due to non-human interference. The first type should be readily picked out by the doctor if, as has already been advised, recourse has been had to him as the essential preliminary. Moreover, he will also be effective in eliminating the frauds from people moving in psychic circles and familiar with their terminology may stimulate a psychic attack either in order to borrow money or obtain hospitality, or out of pure love of notoriety. A far commoner motive for human aberrations than is generally realized. Frauds usually either fade away or recover quickly when threatened with a physical overhaul. Those who decide to chance their luck are pretty quickly caught out by the man who has served his time in the outpatient department of a general hospital. Hello. The diagnosis which the occultist has to make therefore lies in distinguishing between the attack of an incarnate mind and the attack of a discarnate mind. Incarnate mind meaning a physical being. Discarnate mind meaning an astral being or spiritual spirit being, something outside of the flesh, something that doesn't live in a physical vessel. There are two ways in which he can do this, and he ought to use them both so that they countercheck each other. he ought to get at least 2 independent psychics to psychrometrize the case, and he himself ought to make his own diagnosis entirely from the case history interpreted in the light of the first principle. It is a great mistake to mix the psychic and the scientific. They are apt to neutralize each other. What's up, Porky Porky? Let one person do the psychism and another person do the observation. And let proper precautions be taken to prevent the results of the clairvoyant investigation being vitiated by suggestion or by the thought reading of previously conceived opinions held in the mind of any of the persons concerned. It is therefore a good thing to send off the specimens for psychrometrizing at the commencement of an occult investigation before any opinions have been formed. It is not the simplest matter in the world to take a psychrometric specimen properly. I have seen a man bring a lock of hair belonging to someone else out of his pocket, where he had carried it for about a couple of days and handed over for psychometry. Another term y'all might be familiar with is psychomancy. It was a course so thoroughly impregnated with his own emanations as to be useless. A psychometrical specimen should be some object thoroughly impregnated with the vibrations of a person, a garment recently and habitually worn, a lock of hair, a piece of jewelry. All these can be made to serve provided they are properly preserved. Crystalline substances such as precious stones hold magnetism better than anything else. Metals are also good, whether precious or otherwise. A pocket knife, for instance, will hold magnetism well. I see that, Mr. Folgers. Wood holds it badly, and so do paper, wool, cotton, and artificial silk, especially the latter. Silk and linen are good. India rubber is useless. Glass depends for its holding powers upon its form. If it is cut so that it will refract light, it can be very good. If it is flat and purely transparent like window pane, it is almost useless. Stone is fair, earthenware poor. I guess earthenware like silverware would be like wood forks, wood spoons. An elaborate article is not as good as a simple article. For instance, a marquise ring is not as good as a signet ring. Letters are apt to be misleading because they often contain nearly as much of the magnetism of the recipient as of the writer. Some psychics can work from a photograph, but this method is not, strictly speaking, psychrometry, for the mental image evoked by the photograph is used to pick up the corresponding image in the reflected ether. Great care should be used in taking the psychrometric specimen, for it is readily contaminated by the magnetism of anyone who handles it, who is in proximity to it, or who even thinks about it concentratedly. For instance, if while packing up such a specimen for sending off, you are brooding over the problem it presents and working out your own theory, the psychometrics may pick up your thought form instead of reading the conditions of the person to whom the object belongs. So this even applies for readings. When you go and get readings from people, you should be clear. That's why sometimes when you get readings from people, you should use your intuition always. Don't just assume, I don't care what their status is, or what kind of testimonials they have, make sure it's someone that you know is very good at what they do, because signals can be mixed. Somebody could think they're reading you, but they could be reading energies around you. They could be reading something you're thinking about. And sometimes that's when people get these readings and they be like, that sounds crazy, because it's not pure connection. For example, what I just say, the psychic may pick up your thought form instead of reading the conditions of the person to whom the object belongs. The materials which are used for packing should also be free from magnetism. I knew of a case wherein the psychic said that a certain trinket belonged either to a nurse or to someone who had to do with hospitals. As a matter of fact, it belonged to neither, but it had been packed in surgical cotton wool. Let me highlight this for my own notes. I should have been highlighting this from the beginning, but I just want to highlight this just in case I need to come back and go over it myself one day. Just highlight that whole damn paragraph. Because you never know. So we be looking for ways to protect ourselves and ways to protect others. And it'd be right here. You don't have to live in fear. We don't have to. We don't have to. We have power. So it's like the principle of polarity. Like and unlike or alike. The pendulum swings to the left just as the pendulum swings to the right. So you don't have to be afraid of quote unquote evil, because just as powerful as you think evil is, good is also just as powerful. And you can neutralize that so called evil with the so called good, which is your protection. You protecting yourself. So, like I said, we don't have to be afraid of anything, but that comes with knowledge and wisdom. Because even myself, now I question myself and I ask myself, what are you afraid of? Anytime some fear try to creep up in my life or in my mind or my heart, I just ask myself, why are you afraid of this? And then it just reminds me that, okay, you don't have to be afraid of this. More commonly, let's say you by yourself, you home alone in a dark room, and you hear noises, you may think it's a spirit or something. What you afraid of the spirit for? They can't do nothing to you but try to scare you. And if they don't sense any fear, they usually leave you alone. So they do things. Not all spirits, of course. Some spirits are here to give you love. I'm just saying. Some spirits are here to comfort you, like your grandma. Your grandma might come, her spirit might come to comfort you. Your spouse passed on, their spirit come to comfort you and give you love. So don't be afraid of spirits. But what I'm saying is, you know how in the movies a ghost or something pop up and then they be like, trying to scare them. That's because that fear is feeding off of that energy. That's why they do that. Not just because they simply trying to hurt you. They trying to get a reaction out of you. So if you don't give them the reaction, the energy for them to feed off of, they usually just leave you alone. They're gonna go harass somebody else, unless it's just an extreme case. But like I said, or a swing to the left is a swing to the right. So just as extreme as the evil is, there's an extreme of goodness. See what I'm saying? Just as an extreme of destruction, it's an extreme of constructiveness, which will be you protecting yourself. When packing up a psychometric specimen, do it as expeditiously and with as little handling as possible. Take a piece of virgin black or white silk, not colored, large enough to serve as a wrapper. Throw it over the article and bundle it up rapidly, handling it through the silk. In the occult sense, virgin means something that has never been used for any purposes. So don't. That's very self-explanatory. In the occult sense, virgin means something that has never been used for any other purpose. For instance, you should not use part of an old dress or a cushion cover because it carry energy. So you want to use something that's don't have energy on it. People sitting on couches is their energy is infused with the couch. For instance, you should not use part of an old dress or a cushion cover. Same thing as an old dress. Somebody has wore that dress many times. You will want to use a dress that nobody has never worn because it's free of energy, which will not interfere with the reading. For instance, you should not use part of an old dress or a cushion cover. An article which does not lend itself to handling by this method can be picked up with sugar tongs or the point of a pair of scissors and laid on the square of the silk in which it is to be wrapped. Pack the wrapped article in a wooden box, being sure that any padding which is used is also virgin. The report of a single psychometrist should not be relied upon. Well, this would be for like the advanced occultism. You know what I'm saying? When you really in it deep in it, it's kind of like being a detective, like a spirit detective. You know, you got the police, and then you got the spirit detectives. So the police investigate the physical world. The spirit detective investigates the non-physical world, the energy world, the mana world, the prana world. The report of a single psychometrist should not be relied upon. Specimens should be sent to two at least. It is also well when sending specimens, and especially when sending a birth hour for a horoscope, not to allow the name to be known, lest gossip should be spread about. So it's just for gossip. Astrologers are much too fond of handing around charts and discussing them. I have known some very unfortunate things come about in this way. A horoscope from someone who understands the nature of the work in hand is of great value, for the position of the planets in the heavenly houses not only serves as an aid to diagnosis, but is a very important guide to treatment. It is best, therefore, to explain to the astrologer the nature of the case and the kind of information that is wanted, so that he can examine the chart accordingly. A horoscope is to an occult therapist what an x ray photograph is to a doctor. While awaiting these returns and while his mind is still uninfluenced by them, the occultist should make his own independent diagnosis. In order to do this, he should have at least two interviews with his patient. In the first, he should hear the case history, allowing the patient to present the facts in his own way, without guidance or leading questions. Immediately, the patient has left. The operator should write out the case history with as much detail as he can recall. It is exceedingly undesirable to take notes in the presence of a patient because it makes him nervous. For he feels that, in the words of the police court, everything he is saying will be taken down and used as evidence against them. In preparation for the second interview, the occultist should study his record carefully and have his points and sequence clear in his mind. Now is the time to question the patient concerning any discrepancies or hiatuses. This proceeding will reveal the liar, whether deliberate or hysterical, quicker than anything else. For the discrepancies of his second statement will be clearly revealed against the written record of his first. If he is telling the truth, the two statements will be in agreement. If he is distorting the facts, he will soon contradict himself. Remember that you are dealing with a person who has something of either the psychic or the neurotic, or very likely both, in his disposition, and that your attitude towards him and even your unspoken thoughts will influence him profoundly. If he feels that you are doubting his veracity, he will lose his self confidence and begin to think that his experiences may, after all, be the fruits of his own imagination. Consequently, he will suppress things which may be all important for the diagnosis standpoint. It is in the outpouring of relevant and irrelevant detail that you are going to find your clues. So basically, what they're saying is don't judge the people, not even in thought, because they can pick up on this energy and they might not tell you everything. They might withhold information that can either mess up the diagnosis to know if they're even telling you the truth, if they're just being psychotic or neurotic, or they might withhold information that you can help them in their treatment. So remember, this is for people. This is for a special group of people. This is not for everybody. This is for people who want to do this type of work. And if you want to do this type of work, then you have been attracted to the right place. It's a reason why you're here. Or you're just passing by, which is cool too. Yeah. Consequently, he will suppress things which may be all important from the diagnostic standpoint. It is in this outpouring of relevant and irrelevant detail that you are going to find your clues. There are certain landmarks which you want to look out for in taking this case history, but you do not want to let your patient realize what you are looking for, because if you have won his confidence, he will be very apt to take on your viewpoint. And if he sees you have formed any opinion, he will unconsciously twist incidents so that they fit in with that of your opinion. Do not allow him to guess the bearing of your questions, and then you will obtain from him an unbiased response. In order to prevent his guessing what you are driving at, do not ask a series of questions elucidating information on a specific point. Don't coerce them. There will probably be several points on which you want information. Ask questions upon first one and then another of these. For instance, if you suspect that the trouble may be due to the house in which your patient is living, the last thing you want to do is rouse his suspicions in this respect, lest you should be on a false scent. And even if you should prove to be on the right track, you do not want to disclose the facts to him unless you are ready to act. For by increasing his apprehensions, you will increase his sufferings. If you suspect that sex plays a part in his trouble, and he guesses the trend of your questionings, he will immediately cover his tracks, and you will find it very difficult to get all the facts at all. Whereas, if his suspicions are not aroused, he will reveal himself to an astute and experienced questioner who approaches him indirectly without realizing that he has done so. By approaching thus indirectly, you not only get at the real facts of the case, but spur his feelings. In taking a case history, you want to look for correlations between your patient's psychic experiences and the circumstances of his life. Dates and places, therefore, should be sedulously sought for. When did the trouble start and where? Having obtained as detailed information as possible on these 2 points, set out to see whether any occult significance is to be found in it. Note the dates carefully and turn them up in an ephemeris of those years, and observe how the moon stood in relation to them. Also, the planets. Observe whether they fell on or about the equinoxes or solstices. Note also the days of the week upon which they occurred. If you found that all the crises of the case occurred on Thursdays or around about the vernal equinox or at the full moon, you will have a piece of information which was of considerable significance. You can even do the same thing on yourself. You will be sure of one thing at any rate, that you were dealing with a case in which the invisible psychic tides played a part. Information should also be sought concerning the place or places in which the different crises of the trouble took place, and especially the circumstances attending its first onset. It is exceedingly useful, if possible, to visit the place and sense its atmosphere. A very great deal can also be learnt from visiting the place where the patient is living. Having obtained such geographical information as you can, study it carefully in connection with a large-scale ordinance. With a large-scale ordnance map, access to this and to and relevant information desired can readily be obtained at any public library. Know whether there are any prehistoric remains in the neighborhood, and if so, how the house bears in relation to them. Observe not only whether it is near any of them, but whether it is in a direct line between any two of them. Look up the history of the district and see whether it affords any further information. Roman remains are often at the bottom of the trouble, for the legions brought some very queer cults with them in the days of Rome's decadence. Druid remains too should be suspect of they if they are near neighbors. Inquire also concerning any unusual objects in the house, such as images of the deities in primitive cults or savage weapons. It is quite possible that powerful elementals are attached to these. Inquire whether the trouble seems to lift when the patient goes away to another place. If the reply is in the affirmative, it may safely be presumed that local conditions are at the bottom of the trouble. But if the reply is in the negative, it does not necessarily follow that the opposite is the case. It may also be that the trouble does not depend upon the place, but upon some person residing at the place. Never forget that in the great majority of cases, that person's harmful influence is due to an unfortunate psychic makeup rather than deliberate abuse of occult knowledge. Be very slow to accept the latter hypothesis, for its occurrence is comparatively rare. And even if the person suspected is known to have occult knowledge and can be proved to be antagonistic to the patient, it does not necessarily follow that the attack is conscious and deliberate. It may be unconscious and reflex. It is quite true that the occultist ought to have sufficient control over his vehicles to prevent them from acting independently of his will and consciousness, but this is not always the case. People are at many different stages of development. There is always a difficult period between awakening of the higher powers and their full control. That's a responsibility that you have to have too when you quote unquote awakening these higher faculties within yourself. That's why we don't operate in fear. because the fear just makes it even more challenging to be in full control. Inquiries should also be made concerning the nature of the dreams and whether the patient is subject to nightmares apart from any question of occult attack. Also, whether he has ever had any other psychic experiences, and if so, of what nature. Finally, a careful inquiry should be made concerning the patient's associates as to whether any of them are psychic or students of the occult. Be very careful, however, not to cast suspicion upon any person unless you have conclusive evidence, and it is essential to do so in order to save the patient. Because you don't want people to know what you be incognito. Don't be so loud, you know, moving in the shadow like a ninja. Remember, it's always possible that you may be mistaken. A case was reported in the papers not so long ago of a man who committed suicide because a doctor told him that he had organic heart disease and ought not to marry the girl he was engaged to. At the post mortem, it was found that there was nothing whatever the matter with his heart. Imagine the feelings of the doctor who had given this rash diagnosis. A person already upset by a psychic attack will be in a state to jump at shadows. He must be handled very discreetly. Be very chary of announcing your suspicions until they are conclusively verified. Until you know, keep your mouth closed. When all is said and done, the main object is a cure, not an explanation. It is of little value to your patient. Hold on, let me highlight that, because that's another thing that we need to understand is people looking for help. They don't want to just hear what you got to say. They want, can you help me or not? It is of little value to your patient to fix the blame unless the matter can be cleared up. He is considerably worse off if his suspicions are turned towards some person in his environment from whom he cannot escape. Then, if he be left to attribute his trouble to unidentified psychic influences. Where ignorance is bliss, this folly to be wise is truer in psychic matters than anywhere else. Never open the eyes of your patient to a danger for which you cannot give him an effectual defense. Let me highlight that too for myself. The surgeon who is about to operate covers his instruments with a cloth so that the patient shall not see them. The wise occultist does the same. Do not forget that the unseen is always suspect to the uninitiated. Having conducted an inquiry along the lines laid down in the previous pages, you should have acquired a considerable amount of material for investigation. Examine it carefully. Examine it carefully for correlations of cause and effect. One of the laws, one of the Hermetic 7 principles. Note, if any exploration of the trouble is regularly associated with any incident, place, or person, consider also the various type cases that I have given as examples in the previous chapters, and see if you can find any that resemble the case you are investigating. Note the explanations given and see if they throw any light upon the problem or suggest lines which inquiry might be pursued. Working in this way, you ought to be able to arrive at tentative diagnosis. If this is confirmed by the findings of the psychics to whom you have sent specimens for psychometry, then you may feel confident you are upon the right track and go forward boldly and courageously. Remember, however, that also the psychics ought to agree as to the main points in the investigations. You cannot expect any complete agreement as to details, but the main points. They are inspecting a composite photograph of the patient's entire life, and there is so much to see that no one person is likely to see everything. The things in which they confirm each other may be held to be established, but the things which the one sees and the other does not are not necessarily illusionary. So that's the end of this chapter. But once again, another common theme is positivity. Now we finna get to the last four chapters, 17, 18, 19, 20, is about methods of defense. So the next chapter, 17, methods of defense, part one. And this is where you learn how to protect yourself and others from psychic attack. And remember, psychic attack don't just mean ghosts, ghouls, and goblins. It could mean just somebody being irresponsible with their thought vibrations. See what I'm saying? Somebody just always harboring negative thoughts towards you or someone else is a form of psychic attack, even though they might not be aware that what they are doing is psychic attack. So it may be just, what's the word I'm looking for? Not deliberately. They not purposely trying to harm you. It's just our thoughts have power. Our emotions have power. And you can send these waves, these energies out. That's why in the Bible it says, whatever things of good report, think of these things. That's what that means. Think of the good things. See what I'm saying? Today is the day the Lord has made, and I should rejoice in it. Think of the good things, because when you think of good things, you send that energy out and you get it back. So, for instance, when you say you're thinking about your spouse or your children or your parents, think good things about them, because you sending this energy to them, and they're gonna receive it and they're gonna send it back to you. Now, when you think negative things about people, you're doing the same thing. You sending it out, and it's gonna come back to you. Now, the advanced people can block this stuff. So that's another reason why you should think positive about people, because there are a small percentage of people, and you don't know who they are. You can't tell who they are by their skin color, by how they dress, or how much money they got. You don't know who they are unless you can see. But what I'm trying to say is, think positive to protect yourself, because there are people that walks amongst us that know how to shield themselves. And when you think negative about them, or somebody thinks negative about you, it's not gonna go to them. It's gonna bounce off of them and come directly back to you with even more momentum. So that's why if you notice, positive people, they usually look youthful. They usually more healthy. They usually more vibrant. They usually more limber, more flexible. See what I'm saying? Because it's the energy. People who are mostly negative, they always talking about people, gossiping about people, wishing death on people, wishing illness on people. You can see it in their face. You can see it in their joints. You can see it in their body. They look beat down, because it's the energy. What you give is what you give. So we're gonna get into methods of defense next. We're gonna teach ourselves how to protect ourselves and our children and our loved ones, and even strangers, even more. Peace and love. Have a nice day. I'll see y'all beautiful asses next time.